Right, so greetings, hello, welcome. So we're doing this interesting weekend retreat on mindfulness and enlightenments, and I'm going to be doing this slot, the first three slots on enlightenments. What are they? Why do they matter? And what is enlightenment anyway? And why am I using the plural, enlightenments plural? So I just want to say a bit first about introducing myself and the context of this session, right, and this course. So I'm a philosopher and historian who's specialised in figuring out the spiritual paths of humanity over many millennia and producing a thing called the periodic table of the world's religious and philosophical traditions, which I have here, and it's also online. I used to be head of religious studies and philosophy in a local school, Poole Grammar School. So hello to all my former students who are now grown up and doing exciting things. And yes, I enjoyed teaching in Poole. It's a great little city, so it's nice to be back in Poole, actually. And I ran a philosophy club in the school, so we would meet after school, like out of love and devotion to the subject. So I'm a teacher that believes passionately in the importance of philosophy, and not just, education for skills or for training or for getting a job. Philosophy is the only subject which one studies for the love of learning itself. And actually the word philosophy means the love of wisdom. So we do it for love, right? And I think that's really important to preserve a sacred space in the curriculum in schools and universities and in life, where we study things for the love of learning, because it's part of our human nature, our human essence as human beings. Homo sapiens is supposed to be our name that we give ourselves as a species, which means the wise humans. And it's time we lived up to that. I'm concerned as a philosopher we're not living up to that on this planet at the moment. So some years ago I came to the view that, to put it in a nutshell, what if the wars raging in the world are reflections of collective turbulence of mind? Can we therefore develop a logic of peace with mindfulness and enlightened consciousness at its core? And if so, how can we do that? So that's what I'm going to be asking over these three sessions. And where I'm coming from is that I have been working with this concept of enlightenments for some years. I gave a talk years ago in Shrewsbury called Enlightenments. I used the plural. And then I gave the same talk to SOAS, School of Oriental and African Studies, to a Buddhist conference which was organised by some very prestigious Buddhist scholars from Korea and all over the world. And I posed this idea of enlightenments plural as a new academic field of study, because we have different models of enlightenment available to us in the world. We have a Buddhist model, which comes in various disguises. There's the Theravada Buddhist, there's the Mahayana Buddhist, there's the Zen, there's different forms of that. But we also have the yogic enlightenments of Hindu thought. The rishis, in the Himalayas, traditionally since the time of the Vedas, have been searching for enlightenment. Well, what have they found? Let's do a report, a world survey of enlightenments. And then we've got Christians who are practicing different forms of meditation, lots of them doing mindfulness trainings, learning, meditation in the church, different schools. I was friends with Dom Sylvester Huadar, a great Catholic Benedictine monk at Prinash Abbey, who was in touch with the Dalai Lama, who was sending Tibetan Buddhist meditational experts to the Catholic monastery in Gloucestershire, Prinash Abbey, and they were comparing and contrasting Buddhist Enlightenment meditation practice with Catholic, and they were finding common ground and also where they differed. Dom Sylvester was an expert also in Sufi meditation. He was an expert on Ibn Arabi and some of the great Sufi masters. And what do they do that's different? What is a Sufi enlightenment? Is it different to Christian? And then what about the Kabbalistic, the Jewish sages, the Hasids, Isaac Luria and people. What kind of enlightenment do they propose? And then there's the Zoroastrians. And what I'm going to do in the course of these 3 sessions is I'm going to summarise the findings of 30 years of study into this. And it's for the benefit of all of us. I see enlightenment as a collective process. We're all engaged on whatever our outer label is, whatever our spiritual path. Or we might be having a purely, scientific, secular path, but we're still interested in enlightenment. The whole phase of history called the Enlightenment, from roughly 1600 to about 1800, a hugely important period in history, the Enlightenment, it's called le siècle des Lumières in French, the age of the Enlightenments, or the age of the enlightened ones, actually, die Aufklärung in German. What happened to it? Where's it gone? I mean, are we living in an enlightened world now? Back in the 18th century, people like Voltaire thought everything was going to get better, progress, science, equality, human rights, gender equality, freedom, democracy and socialism for everyone, and we'd all be enlightened. Well, it didn't really turn out like that. So what's going on? Why didn't that happen? And what's in the way of that? I'm going to be talking about that, the politics of enlightenment as well. So, and then just to say that last year I co-taught a year-long class called Enlightenments, which was equivalent to a master's course, an MA, in comparative study of enlightenments. And I'm going to be drawing heavily on what we did in that class, me and Satyen Raja, and trying to summate all that into these little sessions, which sit really well with what we're learning about mindfulness from Annabelle. Why does it matter? Okay, so I think that, we're facing a crisis as a planet. We have all these wars which have ideological, philosophical and intellectual and religious justifications. We've got Vladimir Putin attacking Ukraine in the name of Russian Orthodoxy, refusing to sign my Interfaith Peace Treaty, carrying on as if they're the only, show in town. The Ukrainians defending themselves. You've got in Israel, Palestine, which I've been to several times and set up the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for Israel and Palestine and the Middle East. We've got total meltdown happening. So we've got forces that are actively, as it were, opposed to enlightenment, which are coming from collective ego of tribalism and nationalism. How can we disentangle that and untangle the knots of ego that are all bound up in this? So just to say background, in 1995 I founded the Multi-Faith and Multicultural Mediation Service when I was working for the Gandhi Foundation as their head of School of Nonviolence in East London, in Bromley by Bow, in Kingsley Hall. And we trained a bunch of elders on the spiritual path, Annabelle was one of them, to try and mediate some of these conflicts. And that's what got me thinking, well, what is, how can we find some common model of enlightenments that they can all agree? So instead of fighting each other for ours is the best religion, ours is the best tribe, our prophets are the best, let's agree what is a universal criteria we can apply to all these parts and get them to agree at least to a sort of civilized conversation instead of throwing bombs at each other or blowing up each other's beepers and sending rockets. It's got out of control here. So I think enlightenment is the goal, but it comes in these different forms and different approaches. So that's why I call it enlightenments, plural. And it's one of the Eightfold Path in Buddhism, which I'm going to be talking about when we discuss. I'm going to do an exploration of the Buddhist approach to mindfulness in detail later on, not today. Today I want to do an introductory thing about the philosophy of language, because where I got into philosophy as a youngster, I didn't want a kind of normal degree and a job and a status and money. I wanted to know the meaning of life. When I was a youngster, it was still possible to think like that in the 70s. And growing up in Brighton, I wanted to become a philosopher and a poet. So I've become a poet and a philosopher, and I think the most important thing to do is to ask about meaning in life. And enlightenment is part of an attempt to bring an answer to that quest for meaning. It's life is an aesthetic thing, as Schiller said, the author of the Ode to Joy, which is the European hymn. Schiller, the great poet and philosopher, he wrote a book called The Aesthetic Education of Mankind. We're here to learn beauty and joy, and we do that through our aesthetics, our sense of beauty, colour, music, form. He was alive when Beethoven was alive. That's why Beethoven used his poem, Ode to Joy, for the Ninth Symphony. And I think all humanity is on this kind of aesthetic journey towards enlightenment. And that's what I wanted to contribute to. So I'm a musician, a pianist, composer, and a poet, and a philosopher. And to me, philosophy is a work of art, which is about finding meaning that everyone can benefit from. At the moment, we're in tribal groups. Our meaning's best. You can't have any. Our meaning's better than yours. We'll fight you to the death. And this is ridiculous. We've got to pool our understandings, pool our collective wisdom as one humanity, and shine a light on this really, really important question of what is the goal or purpose of life. Well, all the great spiritual paths that I've studied say there is one. That's the first point. There is one. We're not here just randomly like some sadistic, alien species created us and we're here to just kill each other. Although some people believe that. Okay, yeah, I don't. I think we're here to experience life in its beauty and fullness and depth and meaning. And we're here to contribute to that by creating the next generation and the next generation and the next millennium, of beauty and meaning. And I want it to be a peaceful one. I think we've reached what people call an inflection point, which is this: we're at a critical stage where we're either going to self-destruct as a humanity, or we're going to find a new way of coexisting with each other's civilizations and cultures and enjoy it. And I'm trying to contribute discourse about the nature of enlightenments to that end. And I'm going to start by looking at language. Why does language matter? So when I went to study philosophy at the University of Bristol years ago, I encountered the Wittgensteinian school of philosophy, which is about linguistic analysis, and the Oxford School of Analytical Philosophy. And, they had a point, which is that to do any philosophy, you have to study the words that you're using to make statements, deconstruct the meaning of the proposition. Is it logical? Does it, and to do that, you have to study the language that's being used. And there are people still doing at Oxford and Western University, still doing analytical philosophy, and it's brilliant. I love them. But my critique of them, I'd already started studying Buddhism. I got interested in meditation at the age of 19. I was practicing a universal Sufi tantric meditation practice at the age of 19, 20, walked to Stonehenge, discovered the Druids, and I was saying to my Oxford-trained analytic philosophers, shouldn't we be looking at the words in other languages as well? Why are we just doing this in English? Enlightenment's an English word, wouldn't it be nice if we could look at it in, say, Latin, or Greek, or Hebrew, or Sanskrit, or Pali? And they all looked at me like I was a bit crazy. Because it was not done to do comparative philosophy from a multicultural perspective. But I persevered, and in fact what I had to do, ironically, was resign from university of conventional British academia, go off to Canada and live in a caravan, just like Wittgenstein did in Norway, and study independently at the University of Calgary, and read all the texts. So I spent 4 years studying all the great classical, spiritual, traditional philosophical texts in detail. And I began a lifelong passion for a linguistic approach to comparative philosophy, which later on, fast forward, when I set up the multi-faith mediation service, I created a multilingual, multi-faith dictionary of philosophical and peace-related terminology. So the languages that are in here, the idea was to put all the key languages. So I have the ancient languages like Latin, Greek, but the classical languages of India, Sanskrit, Pali, also Tibetan, Chinese, Japanese, also Hebrew and Arabic, but also the Middle Eastern languages like Phoenician, Akkadian, which is the ancestor of the Semitic languages, Babylon, Sumerian, and then all the ancient languages of Europe like German, Estonian, all the Nordic languages for the runes, and then the American Indian languages like Hopi and stuff. So this is the first ever attempt by a philosopher or linguist to ever produce such a thing. I don't know why. I don't know what my colleagues are doing. They must be asleep, because this to me is the most important thing we need. If we're going to get peace between, say, Hebrews, Palestinians, Christians, Muslims, we've got to learn what are the words you're using, So like in Islam, there's the 99 names of God. Well, what are they in Arabic? So they're here in the dictionary. I give them all. Al-Malik, the king. Al-Latif, the subtle. Because Muslims believe rightfully that God is incredibly subtle. He moves very gently and slowly, and before you know it, everything's shifted and it's going right. He's the guardian, Al-Hafiz, the wise, Al-Hakim, and so on. These are beautiful names. They're called the beautiful names. So what I was saying is, why don't we study, say, if all the Jews that are currently bombing Gaza studied the 99 beautiful names of God, which are revered and adored by all the average Palestinians, they might stop throwing the bombs. They might start having philosophy seminars on Enlightenments together instead. Because you have similar names in Hebrew, which I've given all the words for. The Sephiroth of the Kabbalah are in effect the stages at which God is constantly evolving and shifting and changing energies. We're all on the tree of life somewhere. It's made in the image of, a man is made in the image of God. The secret is the tree of life, the Kabbalistic Sephiroth. So we should study that, shouldn't we? And then we'll realise that Sufis and the Kabbalists are saying exactly the same thing. The Christians are saying the same in the Divine Names, the famous mystical book by Dionysius, the Areopagite, which is about the names of God. Things like God is the just, God is the good, God is the true, and so on. He gives an equivalent. And so what I've tried to do with this dictionary, therefore, is to map and marry. It's like a sort of marriage bureau for lost hearts, because there are beautiful people in all these traditions that think they're enemies, think they're fighting each other over existentially vital things they won't relinquish. But if only they knew it, the other guy's saying pretty much exactly the same thing in their language. So that's what this project is about, and that's why I want to start I'll be sharing some linguistic reflections about the philosophy of language. What can that tell us about Enlightenment as we proceed? And the first thing is that, yes, we've already got this as a group. I've always thought mindfulness is a funny name for what we're trying to achieve, because I thought the whole point is to empty the mind, to achieve a state of peace, inner peace, instead of your mind being full of stuff. So mind emptiness surely would be a better approach. But if we're going to stick with the idea of mindfulness, then there is the idea of a plenitude, a plenum. In Gnostic teachings, Gnostic Christianity, there's something called the pleroma, which is where you reach the omnipresent omniscience of the divine sphere, which enwraps this planet. We're stuck here in the sublunar world, just, having good days, bad days, adventures, exploring everything. But when you reach the pleroma, you reach the all and everything place, which we all do, actually, eventually. Sometimes it takes many lifetimes, because we're so stuck in the particularities that we forget the universal, the all. But so there is a place in Gnosticism for this notion of the fullness, and one of Sachin Raj's teachers is a famous Gnostic Christian Serbian psychologist who's created a lot of very interesting exercises around how to reach that place in yourself psychologically, which Sachin has shared some with me. and with other students. And I think another word for enlightenment would be omniscience. Omniscience is technically what Buddha achieved. It means all directional knowing. So omniscience is not just a science like physics, chemistry, maths, or whatever, or geometry. Omniscience is seeing all the way round things. So if you apply an omniscient approach to a problem like global warming or war or whatever, you're recognizing that it has to be a multidisciplinary approach and approach from many angles simultaneously. So if we can apply enlightenments into contemporary planetary management discourse, which is vital, we can actually make a difference in the real world. And the UN is struggling with this because Antonio Gutierrez, a great Portuguese intellectual statesman, is trying to get the UN to kind of reform so it can deal with the planetary emergency that's going on. It's all been made much more complicated with AI because artificial intelligence has been weaponized to create fake news, fake information. So we're dealing with multi-polar threats to humanity. Global warming, is just one of them. Imminent nuclear war is another. But also the meltdown of belief in the possibility of truth, because everything you see online seems to be twisted and deceitful. And we know that intelligence agencies, that's the wrong word for them, have been weaponizing this. Brexit, for instance, was a weaponized misinformation campaign by Russian intelligence bots operating out of St. Petersburg. Colleagues of mine who study this have now proved this beyond a shadow of a doubt. And they used the weakness in certain elements of British society, which are quite racist, anti, the other, anti the immigrant, to galvanise this incipient hate speech going on in subcultures in Britain, to then make it mainstream. And we have Farage and the rise of this populist right wing going on. It was deliberate. Now, how on earth can we deal with that? Because it's happening not just here, but in other countries. It happened in Russia, it's happening, the rise of the far right in Trump land. Well, how do we apply omniscience to tackle that problem? That's I believe it can be done, because what these merchants of division and hatred sow is partiality, partial truths. Our race is better than that race. Our religion is better than that religion. We're the real people, they're just demons, and we should kill them off. Those people are saying that everywhere. The omniscient mind doesn't speak like that. The omniscient mind, or the enlightened mind, says, come on, we're all on the same journey, whether you're black, white, yellow, whatever, whether you have got a beard or not, or whatever the colour of your skin. We're all human souls on a journey towards some kind of enlightenment. Let's share that together. Let's share our highest wisdom as one culture to the other, one person to the other, and therefore no longer demonize each other. Let's accept that what I thought was the devil, that is your God, is actually can teach me something. Allah, he sounds quite cool. I didn't know he had 99 names. Maybe they're not all terrorists, or Jews, what they believe in, like Sephiroth and Tree of Life, maybe they're not all demonic people, So we can learn humility by respecting each other's languages. That's the first lesson I want to share here. Other words for enlightenment. Awareness, that's come up a bit earlier. That's a beautiful word in Old Anglo-Saxon. Aware is related to the word wariness, to be, and it's related to be thinking about something deep, and it's got some very deep, interesting etymology. If you go into the Anglo-Saxon, I've got Anglo-Saxon in the dictionary here, because it's the root language of English, a lot of English, and it tells us and teaches us some very interesting truths. And if you relate them back to the runes, which was the religious language vocabulary of the Anglo-Saxon priesthoods, then you can really cruise. So be wary is a very important kind of concept. So it's being on your guard. Were you aware of what you were speeding there? I'm going to fine you, says the cop. So aware is being aware of like what you're doing and not getting into trouble. So another word that's also important is consciousness, which is a very deep word, and I can give you the deep etymology, but it comes from Latin. It means, it's very interesting because scio means to think, con is with, so conscio, conscious, really is that with which we think. It's and it's very interesting. Consciousness is that which enables us to know. Now there's a whole field in neuroscience and philosophy called consciousness studies now, which some of my colleagues and friends are developing. If you're interested, check out the Scientific and Medical Network, because they're at the forefront of some of this. What is consciousness? Well, they're wiring up the brain and trying to see where it is, you know. Anil Seth, Professor of Neuropsychology at the University of Sussex, is a pioneer in this. They haven't found it anywhere in the brain, but they do know that when you're thinking about particular types of things, different bits of the brain power up, and you can chart that on machinery. Consciousness is the interconnectedness of the whole thing firing at once. And they've also done studies with, say, psychedelics, when you take LSD or something and then do a brain scan, all kinds of parts of the brain are firing up that don't normally fire up. The whole thing becomes like a psychedelic art show. I think enlightenment is when you can access the whole thing as you need it, not all at once, but sequentially when it's appropriate. I have a dear friend, an Indian guru, who helped me set up the World Intellectual Wisdom Forum, who we had a private one-to-one chat in Hyderabad once, and first thing he said when I came into the room was he was smiling and laughing. He said, "I love your work, great stuff, you know." And he said, "I've been thinking a lot about omniscience, Thomas. It's not knowing everything at once, but it's knowing where to look when you need to know something." So I thought that was quite cool. So it's everything is there, including knowledge of all your past lives, knowledge of all your karmic mistakes, knowledge of all your blessings, knowledge of all the karmic consequences of all your actions. This is what Buddha saw on the night before his enlightenment. It's when you get access to all that sum totality of your knowledge field. But to have it all at once in your consciousness is too much. That's why I think in the Jewish tradition, when Moses was shown the face of God, he said, "No, I don't want to see that, turn away." He couldn't stand it. Or when Krishna revealed himself to Arjuna in the chariot, and Arjuna said, "Blimey, tone it down, mate, that's too much," because the entire universe was revealed as Krishna. So we humans can't cope with all the omniscience all at once. And I think that enlightenment is learning to navigate when we need access to that stuff, and when we don't, because we need to feed the cat, or we need to wash the dishes, or look after a child, or mend a broken bone, or whatever it is we do, right? So the human condition is wonderful because we, as Sachin likes to say, we are gods at playing being human. But to do that properly, you have to be also kind to the humans, because they can't cope with too much enlightenment, as T.S. Eliot said. Mankind cannot bear too much reality, he said in one of his great poems. So consciousness is very interesting. And one thought about this I'd like to share is, in French, consciousness is la conscience. Now that's come into English as conscience. This is interesting, that we in English make a distinction between consciousness as a sort of field of knowingness that we study as scientists, and conscience, which is an inner voice that knows the difference between right and wrong. Gosh, wouldn't history be different if we never split the two things? if what we call in English consciousness, well, I can report it's called la conscience. It's your conscience, which is your deepest knowingness of what is right or wrong, which is where you get hunches, intuitions, and you just know something's wrong, so you don't do it. And that should be operative in all of us. Like, I know it's wrong to kill people or harm them or do verbal harm or any forms of violence, you know, etc. I know it's wrong to steal. Like the Ten Commandments, they're universal in all the traditions. But we've sort of forgotten that. We've lost our conscience. And if there's one word you take away from this, la conscience is the secret of consciousness. Another word that's very important is thought. Thought, that's a lovely Anglo-Saxon word. And it's related to the word think, thinking, you know. Now those are related to the word to thank in Anglo-Saxon. If I think of you, I thank you at the same time. So when you say to somebody, thank you very much for that, what you're saying in etymological terms in Anglo-Saxon is, that's amazing. I'm going to think about this. Thank you for that. So gratitude, we talked earlier about gratitude is so important to enlightenment. So gratitude is the secret of good thought, right thought. You know, I used to play a game on the tube when I lived in London. You know, an hour-long commute each way and boring, and nobody talks to anyone, and they're all reading their books, papers, or on their phones now. It's pre-phones. So I would play a game. I'd look at everyone on the tube, and I'd find something to like about all of them. Like the hairstyle of that one, the handbag of that one, the smile of that one, the book that one's reading, whatever. I'd go around and I'd find something to like or be grateful for. Because everybody's got something. Everybody's got a story of beauty. I can be thankful to everyone on that tube, you know. And it was like a cross-section of everyone. It's a good practice to do. That's practicing mindfulness on a tube, if you want. So yeah, thought is important. Look up the etymology. Everyone should get an Anglo-Saxon dictionary. I wasn't able to bring mine. It's in France. The next word I want to talk about is intelligence, because intelligence is a great word, and the words for intelligence in all different languages are very interesting if you look at them. I've just been looking at them in all different world languages for my next project I'm working on, which is called the 99 Names of Peace. And I just want to share this project that I'm working on. So what I'm doing in this 99 Names of Peace book is I've got 99 languages, which include all the ones I mentioned, you know, Japanese, but also Iroquois, Ancient Egyptian, Turkish, Urdu, Zulu, Maori, Tibetan, Aramaic, Avestan, you know, Malayalam, which is number 55 in my dictionary, Hausa, which is a language in Nigeria, Eskimo, one from Greenland. And the words for intelligence are really interesting in all these languages, which I've been clocking. And it's related to the word intellect, intelligence and intellect. And what intellect is, if you look at it etymologically, is the ability to make connections between things. So Abelard, the founder of the University of Paris, who I greatly revere, he introduced Aristotelian philosophy into Western thought and created the University of Paris, which led to Oxford and Cambridge and all the rest. He used the word intellecting as a verb. It's not a noun, intellect, it's a verb, it's an activity. Intellecting is interconnecting